Hey, welcome back. I'm Ibnul Jaif Farabi, and this is the Curiosity Compendium. You know, I was walking through Lower Manhattan the other day, right by the old Western Union building, and it got me thinking. We live in a world of instant, silent communication. I can send a thought to my family in Dhaka, and it arrives before I've even finished my sentence. But there was a time, not that long ago really, when the very idea of a message traveling faster than a galloping horse was pure magic. That magic had a name, the Telegraph. And what I find utterly fascinating is that it did so much more than just send messages. It quietly, irrevocably, rewired the human brain. It built the modern mind. And that's our story for today. So, picture this. It's May 24th, 1844. In the Supreme Court chamber in Washington, D.C., a painter and inventor named Samuel Morse is about to send the first official telegraph message. He taps out a series of clicks on a simple device. 40 miles away in Baltimore, his assistant, Alfred Vail, listens and transcribes. The message? What hath God wrought? Now, that's a biblical quote, but it's also a genuine, stunned question. What had they wrought? They weren't just sending 4 words. They were annihilating distance. For the first time in human history, information was completely untethered from the physical object carrying it. A thought could travel independently of a person, a horse, a ship, a train. This was a psychological earthquake, and the aftershocks were immediate and profound. The first major shift was in our perception of time and space. Before the telegraph, news was local and it traveled at the speed of geography. If you lived in St. Louis, you found out who won the presidential election weeks, sometimes months after the fact. The now in New York and the now in St. Louis were completely different moments. The telegraph synchronized the nation. It created, for the first time, a shared, immediate present. Suddenly, people in different cities were reacting to the same news on the same day. This created a new kind of community, not one bound by location, but by information. It was the birth of the mass public consciousness. We started to think of ourselves as part of a larger, simultaneous conversation. That feeling you have when you're live tweeting an event with people across the globe? The seed of that was planted by Morse's clicking key. This new network of whispering wires demanded a new language, and that's our second mental shift. Morse code. It was a language stripped bare. No nuance, no tone of voice, no elegant prose. Just efficient, precise bursts of information. It forced a new discipline on communication. Brevity and clarity became paramount. You had to pay by the word, so you learned to distill your thoughts to their absolute essence. This bled into journalism, giving rise to the inverted pyramid style, the most important facts first. It bled into business, with terse, direct instructions. We began to value the signal over the noise, the data point over the flowery description. In a way, the telegraph trained our brains for the age of data that was to come. It was the first time we routinely interacted with a system that required coded, abstract thinking for everyday communication. It made us comfortable with the idea that meaning could be carried not in text, but in a pattern of pulses. That's a pretty big conceptual leap. But here's where it gets really personal for me. As an engineer and an immigrant, the telegraph built the first truly global network. By the 1860s, cables were being laid across the Atlantic Ocean. Think about that audacity. To take this fragile copper thread and lay it across 2 miles of ocean depth, spanning a continent and an ocean to connect 2 worlds. That transatlantic cable was the Apollo program of its day. And when it started working, it changed the psychology of migration forever. My own story, leaving Bangladesh for New York, was possible because I could stay connected. But imagine a European immigrant in the 1880s, boarding a steamship for America. Before the telegraph, saying goodbye to family was a final, profound rupture. You might not hear from them for years, if ever again. The arrival of a letter was a monumental, emotional event. The telegraph transformed that aching uncertainty into a manageable thread. A safe arrival message could be sent and received in a day. It shrank the emotional distance even when the physical distance remained vast. It allowed people to hold 2 worlds in their mind at once, the old home and the new, and keep them connected. It made the global village imaginable long before the term was ever coined. Which brings me to the final, and perhaps most subtle, rewiring. The telegraph introduced us to the anxiety of instant information. For the first time, People experienced the burden of knowing too much, too quickly. A financial panic in London could trigger a collapse in New York within hours. News of a battlefield loss could spread a wave of despair across a country in a single afternoon. There was no longer a built-in buffer of time to process events. The constant drip feed of updates, the pressure to react, the feeling of being overwhelmed by a world that suddenly felt much smaller and much faster. That started right here. The Telegraph created the first information overload. It asked a new and stressful question of the human psyche. Now that we can know everything happening everywhere, how do we cope with it? So, what's the takeaway from all this? As I walk these New York streets, surrounded by glass and fiber optics, I see the ghost of the Telegraph everywhere. It taught us to think in networks, not just in points. It made abstraction and code a part of daily life. It gave us the gift of a connected world and the burden of its constant whispers. It shifted our very consciousness from local to global. Every time we send a text, check a news alert, or feel that twinge of anxiety from a constant stream of information, we're living in a world the Telegraph built. It wasn't just a machine. It was a teacher. And its lesson was that speed changes everything. Not just what we do, but how we think, how we feel, and how we imagine our place in the world. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. If you enjoyed untangling the wires of history with me, please do share this episode with someone else who loves stories about how our world came to be. For more from me, Ibnul Jaif Farabi, and the entire team, visit our home at Light Not Studios. https://www.lightnotstudios.com. Until next time, stay curious.